think I've gone down quite a different tack or understanding of what we were being asked to do this evening, but I feel like it's still fine. And I really, it struck me when Kate started talking about the kind of like life plan, but kind of, you know, the whole like tick boxing, like, you know, married, kids, career, house, you know, all that kind of stuff. Because sometimes I feel like I'm a bit crazy when I'm talking to people about really feeling like that's the message I've been given. And sometimes they look at me a bit like, you know, I'm not sure what I was like, it's not just me. So I started meditating. That's how I got into, you know, being influenced by Buddhism. And it was going to an evening on meditating on shunyata, which is emptiness, or can be translated as openness, because emptiness seems to not appeal to a lot of people. And I think that thread of openness has kind of continued all the time. It's like this underlying inspiration or connection that, yeah, sort of keeps me going. And I think initially through this meditation evening on shunyata had like quite a strong effect on me. And it was something about knocking out views or just seeing that other ways of being existed, or how much, you know, everything looks like this in my head, but that's not necessarily actually concrete and true in a kind of absolute way. And I think that gave me just like this little like glimmer of like the freedom that is possible from believing, you know, happiness lies in like this path of, you know, kind of movies or something, like where, you know, it all ends happily ever after when they've got their life like set up in this sort of specific way. Because I was sort of, because I didn't know what to do, I was kind of following that, even though I've had a lot of resistance to some of those tick boxes. I was like, well, I'll do the ones that I do feel okay about, like the career one, for example. And it was not working at all, and was sort of consuming my life and not a good way. And yeah, so it was sort of through seeing, oh, there is actually other stuff, and oh, there's this bunch of people who are talking about a different way of being that I understand, or a different way of living, or having different values that really spoke to me and sort of like hooked me in. And yeah, I've been pretty consistent, like since finding Buddhism, I haven't like gone away. But yeah, and so I want to talk about shunyata, or emptiness, in terms of my current practice now. And it's sort of, I think it just brings me so much like joy and hope and spaciousness. I have no idea when I started. What time did I start? Sorry. When do I need to stop talking much, Josie?
You've got ages.
Okay.
You started about 2 minutes ago.
It feels like
20.
About 4 or 5 minutes.
8:40.
Yeah, so I just find it really joyful, and it's sort of a way that I find resilience in the world, and kind of being able to like connect back with myself. I think from my upbringing, I was very much, well, there is kind of acceptable ways to view the world, be in the world. So there were sort of certain elements of me which I kind of like hid away. So maybe more kind of like imaginative sides, or kind of anything that wasn't kind of very scientific materialism-y kind of views and things like that. So yeah, I kind of want to sort of tell a bit of a story of emptiness in relation to working with the climate crisis related stuff, but it can apply to all sorts of different things. And to me, the beautiful bit of it in particular is that it goes beyond interconnectedness. I think from my upbringing, I could feel quite lonely. I felt like I didn't fit into this system that was being laid out, and having to hide certain parts of myself or things like that. And it just sort of, through kind of going not just are all our lives interconnected, we're all having an effect on everybody else and everything we do in big ways, small ways, and beyond our kind of comprehension, but going beyond that to kind of just not being separate at all. I just find it just sort of, it's just such a relief. It's sort of a sort of a homecoming kind of, oh, I'm not this kind of weird anomaly that's kind of floating off over here and doesn't get it. It's just sort of, everything just is how it is, and that's fine. And yeah, so when I was at university, I did a lot of environment related stuff, and I'd be like, oh, look at all these amazing animals or whatever, and then be like, and this monkey's going to go extinct probably due to the bushmeat trade, and this one's going to go extinct because of global, and sort of leaving lectures just and that really kind of put distancing myself just from kind of horror around it. But I think that was because I was coming at it from this specific view that I'd kind of grown up with. It was quite mechanical, and it was through Buddhism and in that interconnectedness that I kind of found another way to relate to it, which means I don't feel as overwhelmed or overwhelmed at all. And yeah, I mean, I've sort of chosen, I think, to talk about this today because it was an element that I wouldn't tell some of my family members that I'm interested in. And so I found looking through an animistic lens at the world has really helped me kind of emotionally deal with, the climate stuff in particular. And there's an element of me is oh, it's kind of crazy, isn't it? It doesn't fit in with all this stuff I've been taught at school and whatever else. But it's just it's way better. If you're going to have a view, I would recommend that one. So in Living with Awareness, chapter 6 is my favorite. Sangharakshita, where he's talking about elements. So there's sort of earth, wind, fire, etc. But they're to be thought of as different qualities of physical form. So it's sort of, not trying to say literally think that these things were made up of these components in a kind of literal kind of way. And then he's talking about those states of reflecting on things being made up of those elements, particularly in meditation, reflecting in that. So it reminds us that the division between inner and outer worlds is a product of dualistic thinking, rather than any division between a thing called matter and a thing called mind, or a thing called body and a thing called consciousness. There is a continuity running all the way through, a continuity of our awareness patterned in different ways. If we can really understand this, those inner and outer worlds become interfused in a deeper, more meaningful vision of what it is to be alive. All this runs counter to the way we in the West have been conditioned to experience the body and the world of which it is a part. But surely it must be better, or at the very least, more fun to be an animist and feel that the whole world is animated by spirits rather than gazing out at the world of non-living matter, which is occasionally and haphazardly comes to life, and in which even in our own life is ultimately reducible to inanimate matter. And I just find that I don't particularly the line, or at least very more fun. Like, I think that's like having a supply of joy from something. It's sort of, you know, there's a whole range of views that you could pick from. I think I'd rather start out with like a resourcing, fun, nice one. And it's a lot more, yeah, like heartwarming. So I started like during lockdown going on walks with the intention of just looking at everything as if it was living or as if it was conscious in some way, and not in a human way, and not projecting what I think are like, you know, intelligence is on things. And it could be from, you know, it's easier to look at like a tree or something and see it as alive than like a rock. And then you get to like plastic, and how do you feel about plastic? And there's just sort of thinking about, like, using plastic as an example, like where that came from, what is it actually made out of? And you know, a lot of crustaceans and animals and stuff, and it's sort of almost like that weird way that I'm not that different from the plastic. And that I remember feeling angry that we treat things that way, that, you know, this disposable thing, kind of, yeah. Anyway, yeah, I think having an animistic kind of viewpoint brings a lot more respect to what you're looking at, even without understanding of exactly what it is in the world and how it's, you know, manifesting and being. It sort of just brings a connection, and I think that's a big thing that I'd been missing. You know, seeing the world as like a resource or something to be used in all those kind of ways is really just sort of depressing and sort of, to me, brings about this kind of competitive, oh yeah, well, why not use what I can get for my benefit, rather than this kind of more expansive, collaborative sort of approach. So yeah, I wanted to read, I've got time, a brief quote from this book called Braiding Sweetgrass. So it's by a Native American woman, and talks about ecology and all sorts of science and the kind of Native American ways of looking at things, or obviously there's a lot of different cultures, but this is the grammar of animacy. Imagine seeing your grandmother standing at the stove in her apron and then saying of her, "Look, it is making soup, it has grey hair." We might snicker at such a mistake, but we also recoil from it. In English, we never refer to a member of our family, or indeed to any person, as it. That would be a profound act of disrespect. It robs a person of selfhood and kinship, reducing a person to a mere thing. So it is that in Potawatomi and other indigenous languages, we use the same words to address the living world as we use for our family, because they are our family. And that's the kind of thing that I definitely wouldn't say to everybody. And like that element of kind of, I feel like doesn't fit in with certain elements of my family and kind of society. And you know, there's a little bit of me which is going like, whoa, what are you doing? But it's just sort of allowing this kind of imaginative side to develop, and it's just so much more enjoyable and resourcing and beautiful way to look at the world, and like a way that is far more worth living, and one in which I feel like I can do more like positively in the world than kind of cold, hard sort of resourcing sort of ways of looking at things. And yeah, through doing my walking around, looking at everything as if it was a live practice, to sort of, I wasn't doing this practice at the time, but I was on retreat a few weeks or months back, and I remember I was walking by a river and I just looked at it and just sort of felt like, you know, complete love for this river and how beautiful it was. And I just kind of feel like, wow, that's so much better than just walking by a river and not feeling that. And sort of, yeah, like being able to experience that kind of joy just because, you know, the thing is there doing the river thing. And I was in Bristol a couple of weeks back. I went for a walk on the Malago River, and I had the same effect on the particularly like rocky bit with all the water like streaming down it. And there was this plastic bottle that got caught in an eddy, and I just sort of climbed down to like pick it out. And just as it was like floating back away, I was sort of, I'm not gonna, yeah, it was too far to reach without jumping in, so I just had to like walk into the river, because I just felt like we shouldn't treat the river this way. And that kind of applies to like, you know, everything. You know, like in terms of, you know, climate change, climate crisis, all that kind of stuff. I sort of feel like if we actually really had a connection with and cared about where we live and who we live with, then maybe we wouldn't be throwing plastic bottles in rivers. And maybe, yeah, things would be a lot better and more positive. And I think, yeah, I guess what I was trying to get across as well is like, not everyone is in the world is gonna be up for that, or perhaps be able to see the world like that. And obviously to make a big difference in terms of climate change things. A lot of people need to do something. I guess I'm just sharing it as kind of my way of feeling resourced, like somehow caring about, you know, the planet from this viewpoint. So that means I don't feel overwhelmed and exhausted, or I'm much less likely to in response to it. And I think there's a lot of freeing from my personal views, or what I feel like is the right view from kind of my upbringing and conditioning and things. I feel like, you know, it's sort of almost like I'm being like naughty by not viewing things in a certain way and letting myself run off with my imagination and kind of this much more felt way of being in the world. Yeah, and it just sort of helps to break down or kind of see like who I am and who I was, and like the change that's happening, and that how important how you look at the world is and what your views are, and like how that affects how you behave and what it is that you contribute. Yeah. So I think, yeah, I feel like that is my contribution to showing a young person's perspective, one young person's perspective on like their Buddhist journey. Yeah, I think I'm going to stop talking now.